There are places in this world where silence lingers a little too long, where the air carries forgotten chants and shadows remember the names of the dead. Welcome to Whispers of Asia, a realm where ancient rituals were never truly finished, where spirits cling to temple walls and stories are passed down in low voices never meant to be told aloud. Here, we uncover the darkest folklore from Thailand, Japan, Indonesia, and beyond. Stories carved into stone, buried beneath clay, drowned in the monsoon rains, cursed prayers, haunted dolls, hungry ghosts, and offerings that should never have been made. These are not just ghost stories. These are spiritual wounds festering through generations. So light your incense, close your windows, and listen closely, because some whispers are meant only for the living, and some are not. The road to Wat Phra Noen was steep, uneven, and almost forgotten, a cracked ribbon of stone swallowed by banyan roots and silence. Even the birds seemed to hesitate as Chantara's rusted pickup climbed higher into the jungle, its engine grumbling against the gradient. The trees leaned close, ancient and heavy, as if trying to whisper something he was not meant to hear. By the time he reached the clearing, dusk had begun to bleed across the sky. The temple stood before him like a memory half erased, its pagodas leaning, its statues missing arms or heads, and moss creeping like veins across every surface. It was beautiful in its ruin, and Chantara, for the first time in months, exhaled something deeper than breath. He stepped out, brushing dust from his trousers, and looked at the crumbling sign carved into a slab of stone. Wat Phra Noen, abandoned, 1739. He was used to silence, had sought it even, but something in this clearing felt too quiet, not peaceful, just withheld. Behind him, the village headman, an old man named Kiet, cleared his throat. "This is as far as I go," he said, not meeting Chantara's eyes. "No one stays after dark. You understand?" Chantara gave a tired smile. "Ghosts don't bother people like me." Kiet didn't smile back. He simply placed the brass key into Chantara's palm. It was ancient, cold, and oddly warm all at once. "You will hear things. You must not answer." Chantara raised an eyebrow. "If you hear the bell," Kiet said softly, "don't listen, and never ring it." And with that, the headman turned, got into his cart, and vanished down the hill without looking back. Chantara had seen many strange temples in his years as a restoration sculptor, but Wat Phra Noen was different. It hadn't just been neglected, it had been left behind. The altar was still intact, but there were old lines of salt around it, long since blown into corners. The statues of Buddha, normally the first to be restored, had cloth tied over their eyes. He noticed it then, the bell. It stood alone in the heart of the compound, not brass, not iron, but clay, massive, tall as a man, wide at the base, and sealed with golden lacquer down a jagged crack that stretched its side like a wound. The air around it was strangely still, as if even the breeze avoided it. Beneath the lacquer, he saw fingerprints, faint, smudged, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. Chantara stepped closer. It was warm. He touched the bell's surface, and for a moment, it felt like it breathed beneath his hand, exhaling a dry, silent sigh from within. That night, he slept inside the sculptor's hut, a small wooden structure on the edge of the temple grounds. His tools were laid out, his journal open, and the bell just visible through the open window. Crickets sang in rhythm. Fireflies flickered lazily. But around the bell, not a single light dared to hover. He dreamed of mud, of being buried beneath it, mouth open, soil pressing against his chest like a stone. In the dream, he couldn't move, couldn't speak, but he could hear a voice above the soil, faint, childlike, saying, "You forgot to finish the chant." He awoke with dirt in his fingernails. The next morning, he walked the grounds and began assessing the restoration project. The main stupa was mostly intact, save for a collapsed spire. The prayer hall was faded but salvageable. The monks' quarters were gone, overtaken by vines and fungus. He noted everything, took photos, scribbled dates, measured cracks. But his eyes kept drifting back to the clay bell. It hadn't been noted on any of the historical records. And clay was not used for bells, not in Buddhist temples. It was too porous, too fragile, too earthy. He jotted a note in his journal. Unusual artifact, possibly symbolic. Need to consult monastery archives. As the sun crept higher, he approached it again. This time, he noticed a line of faded script carved into the base, written in Lanna Thai, barely legible beneath layers of moss. "Those who listen too closely shall take her breath." He stared at the inscription, heart ticking faster, though he didn't know why. Later, while eating lunch beneath the stupa, Chantara heard something that made his spoon freeze mid-air. One single hollow note. The bell had rung, but there was no wind, no impact, no vibration, just one long, low thum that seemed to echo not through the air, but through him. He stood, staring at it, waiting. Nothing. And yet, the hairs on his arms would not go down. The air smelled faintly of earth after rain, though no rain had fallen. He walked slowly to the bell, hand reaching again, and stopped. There, on the ground, beneath the bell's base, lay a tiny child's footprint, pressed deep into the dry dust. That night, he didn't dream. But just before sleep claimed him, he heard it again, a slow, steady breathing from the direction of the bell. In, out, in, out. The sound of someone trying to breathe through clay. Morning arrived in silence. Chantara opened his eyes before the sun touched the treetops. The air inside the hut was heavy, as if soaked in the dreams he couldn't remember. He sat up, fingers instinctively brushing the wood floor beside him. No dirt under his nails this time. No sign of the breathing he thought he heard. Outside, mist crawled like a living thing between the temple stones. It clung low, curling around statues, slithering past the base of the bell. The birds had not yet begun to sing. Even the wind was slow to wake. He stepped out barefoot, walking toward the bell. It stood there exactly as before, unmoving, untouched. The tiny footprint beneath it had been swept away by the night dew, or maybe it had never been there at all. He hated how it made him question what was real. He circled the bell slowly, notebook in hand. He ran his fingers over the lacquered crack, gently tracing the golden seam. The texture was strange, like skin hardened over time, but still warm beneath the surface. He knocked once. The sound it gave off was deep, but not hollow, not like clay, more like breath caught in the throat. He stepped back and stared. Bells were meant to resonate, to carry prayers, to call monks to meditation. But this bell seemed to pull sound inward, as if it devoured anything spoken near it. He scribbled in his journal. Bell appears to absorb vibration rather than release it. Unknown origin, possibly symbolic, possibly funerary. He paused, possibly bound to something. Later that morning, as the mist burned off, a visitor arrived, unannounced. A monk, barefoot and weathered, appeared at the base of the temple path. He wore faded robes the color of old turmeric and walked without urgency. Chantara saw him through the trees and waited. The monk did not introduce himself. He simply bowed once and stood beside the bell. "You have touched it, haven't you?" Chantara nodded cautiously. The monk looked at the golden seam with unreadable eyes. "It remembers," he said. "I thought monks didn't believe in curses." The monk didn't respond right away. His gaze never left the bell. "She was supposed to sleep. They never finished the chant." Chantara felt a shiver crawl up his spine. "What is this thing?" he asked. The monk finally looked at him. "The breath of the land, a prison, a coffin, a wound, all at once." He turned to leave. "Do not touch the base again. Do not listen too closely. And when it starts to breathe, leave this place behind." Chantara called after him, but the monk had already disappeared into the trees. That evening, Chantara returned to the bell with a flashlight and a camera. He wanted to capture it, analyze it, prove to himself that it was just old clay and fading myth. He photographed the crack, the lacquer, the inscription. He stood close, microphone outstretched. No sound. But then, just as he was turning to leave, he felt it. Air. Not wind. Air moving past his leg. He froze. The air was warm, rising from beneath the bell. Slow, measured, like someone exhaling after being silent for too long. He dropped the mic, and from somewhere deep inside the clay, he heard it again. A voice, faint, childlike, broken by earth. "You forgot." That night, he tried to sleep but couldn't. He lay awake, listening. At first, it was just the rustle of insects, then the chirping of a single gecko near the roof, then nothing, nothing at all. And then, breath. It came in pulses. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. He clutched the sheets tight, refusing to look out the window. The bell was breathing. He knew it now. Not metaphorically, not spiritually. Something beneath that clay shell was pulling in air, slowly, steadily, and every breath made the walls of the hut shiver. In the morning, he found something new. A line of ants stretching from the edge of the jungle to the bell. Thousands of them, moving in silence, forming a perfect circle at its base, as if in worship, as if in obedience. He tried to sweep them away, but they kept returning, always to the same spot. He poured a line of salt across the path. They scattered instantly, but the next morning they were back. This time, inside the bell's crack, crawling, and he watched one disappear into the golden seam. It did not return. He went to the altar and prayed, though he hadn't in years. He asked for protection, for clarity, for proof that what he was seeing wasn't madness. When he opened his eyes, the bell stood still. But the ants had stopped moving. All of them. Dead. That evening, he sat beside the bell with his journal open. He wrote, "I don't think this is a bell. I think it's a lung, or a mouth, or something trying to remember how to be either." There's something inside. It doesn't want to be here, but it doesn't want to be gone either. He closed the journal, staring into the twilight. The temple was growing colder, but the air near the bell remained warm, alive. And just before darkness swallowed the courtyard, he heard the voice again. This time, not from within. This time, just behind his ear. Still breathing. Chantara spent most of the morning searching. Something inside him had shifted. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something sharper, a pressure behind the eyes, a feeling in his chest that made him breathe shallowly, as if taking in too much air might wake something buried. He wasn't looking for beauty in the ruins now. He was looking for answers. The bell had breathed, the ants had formed a circle and died, and the monk's words echoed louder than the bell itself. It remembers. The inner sanctum of Wat Phra Noen was half collapsed, its stone walls blackened by time and smoke. Beneath the altar, the floor sagged slightly, as if something heavy had been buried there centuries ago. Or someone. He moved carefully along the wall, brushing moss aside, searching with hands instead of eyes. The stone was damp, the air hung with the scent of old incense and rotted cloth. There were faint carvings behind the mold, layers of them as if previous generations had written over each other. Then he found it. A loose stone, discolored, slightly ajar. He dug his fingers around the edge and pulled. The block groaned, heavy with moisture, and fell forward with a thud that echoed far too deeply. Behind it, inside the wall, sat a scroll. Not a book, not bound, a rolled parchment wrapped in silk, blackened at the edges as if scorched by fire. He lifted it carefully, heart pounding. The silk was stiff with age, but the scroll inside had survived. When he unrolled it, a thin cloud of dust rose into the air. Not dust from age, but from earth. Dirt, fine and red, like the soil outside. He unrolled the manuscript on the stone floor and read by the beam of sunlight that pierced the roof. It was written in old Lanna Thai, a dialect he understood only partially, but the words that mattered were clear. Pichiton Din, the earth offering, a ritual of binding, a spiritual seal, a sacrifice. The steps were written in careful, reverent hand, as though the act of writing them had been part of the rite itself. Step 1. Select the vessel. It must be pure of heart, but touched by disease, chosen not by the monks, but by the land. Step 2. Prepare the chamber. Earth must be mixed with breath. The clay must be shaped with silence. Step 3. Bind the vessel with prayer, but no final chant must be spoken until the vessel is no longer alive. Step 4. Seal the vessel beneath the bell of silence, never to be rung. Step 5. Bury the breath within. He read the words again and again. Then he reached the final line, scrawled hastily beneath the others, written in a different hand, a desperate one. Bind her with the final breath, or she shall wait for yours. Chantara sat frozen. 1,000 images spiraled through his head, the monk's warning, the bell's warmth, the tiny footprint in the dirt. He remembered the dream, the sensation of soil filling his mouth, and the voice, "You forgot to finish the chant." Later that day, Chantara sat outside the bell, manuscript beside him, sweat beading on his forehead despite the shade. He whispered the words to himself. Each syllable tasted wrong in his mouth. There were drawings on the scroll, too, diagrams of the bell, the soil pit beneath it, and the child who was to be entombed alive. Her hands were to be pressed into the inner wall of the bell before sealing, her last breath caught inside. And then silence. Eternal silence. Not as a blessing, but as a containment. He stared at the bell now with new eyes. It wasn't a relic, it was a prison, and maybe not even a successful one. He walked around it slowly, feeling every line, every seam. His fingers lingered on the crack, on the golden lacquer. It wasn't just for preservation, it was a seal, and he had chipped it days ago. He looked down at the earth beneath the bell. Something pulsed faintly in the soil, as if heartbeat and breath had become one. That night, he dreamed of fire. A burning village, a girl running through the smoke, her hands bleeding, her mouth sewn shut with golden thread. She screamed silently as villagers held her down and buried her in clay, not gently, not ritually, but in panic, in fear. She stared at him from beneath the earth, still breathing, still listening. The next morning, Chantara found a word etched into the inside of his hut's window. Not written, etched, with a nail or bone or something harder than flesh. It said only one thing: finish it. He didn't know if it was a command or a plea. Maybe both. He stepped outside and stood before the bell. Windless, breathless, the jungle watched silently. And then, from the tree line, he heard the soft sound of a girl laughing. Not joy, mockery. The laughter of something waiting to be remembered. Something that had not yet finished breathing. The jungle around Wat Phra Noen was always quiet in the early morning, but this morning it was silent. Not the silence of dawn, the silence of something watching. Chantara sat on the steps of the stupa, the manuscript open across his knees, the words he had read the night before echoing again and again in his skull. Bind her with the final breath, or she shall wait for yours. He stared at the bell. He hadn't gone near it since the scratching appeared on the window, not out of fear, or not just fear, but guilt. He had chipped the base. He had touched what should have remained sealed. He had woken her, and she had begun to stir. He saw her for the first time just before dusk. He was brushing moss from the prayer hall walls when he felt it, that cold, crawling sensation at the back of his neck, as if someone had exhaled directly onto his skin. He turned. Nothing. The temple courtyard was empty. But the bell looked different, not in shape, not in size, in shadow. There was something beside it, barely visible in the dimming light. A figure crouched low, head tilted unnaturally, hair like wet threads clinging to its face. He stepped forward slowly. It turned. What he saw would never leave him. A girl, maybe 10, maybe younger. Her face was cracked clay, her skin gray and slick, as if half fused with mud. Her eyes were open, but the whites were dim like dried paint. Her lips moved but made no sound. And her hands, they were rotted down to bone, skin sloughing off like old bandages, blackened at the tips, nails twisted backward. As she raised them, he saw fingerprints burned into her palms, as if she had tried again and again to claw her way through the bell wall from the inside. She opened her mouth, and earth fell out. Then she vanished. That night, the dreams returned, but they weren't dreams anymore. He knew that now. He was underground, pressed in all directions by wet soil. He couldn't move, couldn't scream, but above him a girl sat on the surface, singing, off-key, over and over, one line. They forgot to end the chant. Her hands rested on the ground, fingers sinking slowly into the dirt, crawling toward his face. He woke gasping, throat dry, hands gripping the sheets so hard his knuckles were white. There was soil in his mouth. The next morning he packed to leave. He told himself it was temporary, that he just needed space, clarity. But when he reached the edge of the trail, he stopped. There were no paths. The jungle had shifted. He knew this trail. He'd driven it 3 times, but now the trees had moved, grown thicker, bent inward. The trail was gone. Only undergrowth and roots. He turned in every direction, sweat breaking across his forehead. He was alone. Or he was not alone, and that was worse. He returned to the temple grounds, to the bell. It waited, as still and warm as ever, but now there were marks around its base, scratches, grooves like clawing. And in the soil below, more footprints, all small, all barefoot, all leading in a circle around the bell, like a child pacing, waiting. He spent the day in the prayer hall, trying not to look at the manuscript, trying not to remember the girl's hands, but the silence inside the temple pressed in, until he heard her again. Laughter, soft, crooked, behind him. He turned slowly, and there she was, at the edge of the doorway, watching him. Her skin was peeling from her cheeks. Her ribs showed beneath her dress, which was made of rough cotton, soaked brown at the hem. She tilted her head again. Her mouth moved, but instead of a voice, there was a sound like dirt shifting. Then her mouth opened too wide, and she stepped backward into the shadows. He couldn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat at the altar, candles flickering around him. He opened the manuscript again, not to read, to listen. The ink on the page looked darker now, fresher. The diagrams bled into each other. But there was something new. Another line, one he hadn't seen before, written in small script at the bottom. If the vessel is not sealed in silence, her soul will wander until it finds a voice. He stared at the line for a long time. She wasn't just haunting the bell. She was learning how to leave it, how to speak again, and maybe how to breathe through someone else. In the hour before dawn, the bell rang again, not once, but 3 times, low, deep, and impossibly soft. It didn't echo in the air. It echoed inside his lungs. He coughed. Soil spilled from his mouth. His eyes stung. His ears rang. And then he heard the voice right behind him. Still breathing. Chanthara woke to the sound of chanting, but it wasn't morning prayer. It wasn't human. The sound was broken, like a recording played backward, then forward, then backward again. A soft, rhythmic murmuring that seemed to coil through the temple walls, rising and falling like breath trapped in the bones of the earth. He sat up, sweat clinging to his back, the manuscript still open beside him. The candle he had left burning had gone out, yet the room was glowing faintly, as if lit from beneath the floor. He followed the sound outside. The air was thick, humid, unmoving, and yet every tree seemed to tremble. The bell stood exactly where it always had, but now the space around it felt crowded. The chanting was coming from the ground. He dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to the earth. There were voices beneath him, dozens, maybe more, all whispering the same 4 syllables again and again. But he couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm, like a lullaby sung to the dead. By sunrise, the voices had stopped, but something else had arrived. A boy, no older than 20, carrying a satchel and a toolbox, standing at the base of the temple trail. He introduced himself simply, eyes lowered. "Preacher, I'm here to assist with the restoration. They sent me from the university." Chanthara almost laughed. Sent? No one knew where he was anymore. No one should have known how to find this place. But Preacher looked real, solid, human, and Chanthara needed help, even if he didn't want to admit it. So he nodded, gestured toward the bell. Preacher stared at it for a long time before saying a word. "Is it supposed to be breathing like that?" Chanthara blinked. So he hears it too. Over the next 3 days, Preacher worked mostly in silence. He was respectful, precise, but Chanthara could tell the boy was unnerved. Every time they passed the bell, Preacher's eyes flicked toward it like it might move or whisper. And each night, the chanting returned, deeper now, closer. The 2 of them stayed inside the sculptor's hut, neither willing to sleep. Candles burned until they guttered. The jungle outside felt too still, like it was listening. On the 4th day, Preacher approached Chanthara at dusk. "There's something beneath the bell," he said quietly. "I saw the edge of a seal in the soil, carved stone, with symbols I've never seen." He paused. They looked like mouths, open mouths, screaming. Chanthara felt the manuscript in his hands grow heavier. He nodded, gestured toward the bell. "And tonight, we dig." They waited until the sky turned black. Then, under the light of a single lantern, they dug slowly at the base of the bell. The earth was softer than it should have been, like it wanted to be moved. After the 3rd hour, they hit clay, not loose clay, but shaped, a dome, a lid. Preacher wiped his forehead and stared at it. "Sir, I think this is part of the bell." "No," Chanthara whispered. "This is beneath it." They cleared the edges, revealing a perfect circle. Around its rim were glyphs carved so deeply they had filled with soil. He wiped them gently and found a handprint, small, pressed into the clay like a child's final breath. He touched it, and the chanting stopped. Instantly, like something had noticed. Preacher screamed. Chanthara turned, flashlight beam jerking across the ground. Preacher had collapsed, clawing at his ears. "She's under us! She's under us! She's under us!" And then he fell silent. Not asleep, not unconscious, just silent. Mouth open, eyes wide, as if listening to something only he could hear. Chanthara tried to shake him, but Preacher didn't respond. Not for minutes, not for hours. And when he finally blinked, slowly like surfacing from deep water, he whispered something Chanthara would never forget. "She's learning how to speak." Chanthara left Preacher resting in the hut and walked alone to the bell. His hands trembled, the manuscript burned inside his satchel. He knelt and began to chant. The words were crude, fractured, but something inside him remembered them, not from books, from dreams, from the air. He chanted for hours, voice breaking, tears falling into the dirt, until at last he heard another voice join in, high, feminine, sick. She was chanting with him, word for word, but backward and laughing. He fled, and as he reached the altar steps, he looked back one last time. The bell was breathing, visibly. In, out, in, out, in, out. The clay expanding and shrinking as if lungs pressed beneath its walls, and around its base, hands were rising from the earth, rotting, child-sized, moving in rhythm. By morning, Preacher could not speak. He sat on the floor of the sculptor's hut, staring blankly at the walls, his lips moving soundlessly. His skin had gone pale, and his hands trembled even when still. He flinched whenever the bell rang, even though Chantara could no longer hear it. The sound had moved inside him. Chantara brewed herbs, recited prayers he barely remembered, and lit incense in every corner of the hut. But nothing helped. The boy was no longer alone in his own mind, and neither was Chantara. Later that day, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the jungle. The monk had returned. He said nothing at first, just stood before the bell, eyes heavy, lips pressed tight. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. "I warned you." Chantara didn't answer. He couldn't, because he already knew. The bell had been unsealed. She was awake now, and she was not content to stay buried. The monk knelt slowly at the bell's base and placed both palms on the soil. "It remembers pain," he whispered, "and pain is the deepest kind of spirit." Chantara asked him then, "Who was she?" The monk was quiet for a long time. Then he told the story. In the year 1687, the rains failed. For months, the skies remained dry over the northern mountains. Crops withered, wells cracked, children died in their sleep, lips parched and bellies hollow. The monks prayed, the villagers begged, but nothing changed. So they turned to older knowledge, to buried beliefs, to rituals no longer spoken aloud. Piti Thon Din, the earth offering, a forbidden rite older than the temples, older than the monks, meant to feed the land with living breath, not death, not sacrifice, but suffering. The village elders chose a vessel, a girl, young, isolated, diseased, her body marked with white sores, her skin already dissolving from the inside. She had no name anymore, just a curse, leprosy. They told her family it was a kindness. They said she would bring rain and maybe become sacred. They bathed her in oils, burned her hair, dressed her in white robes, and led her barefoot into the jungle. She did not cry, but her eyes never blinked. They built the clay chamber at Wat Phra Noen, long before it was a temple, just an altar on a hill. They laid her inside, still breathing, still watching. The monks began the chant, but partway through, something changed. The sky darkened, the ground trembled, and the oldest among them, a monk who had lived through famine, shouted for the bell to be sealed, immediately, without finishing the rite. They sealed her in before the breath left her body, buried her inside a living bell. Her fingers clawed the walls as they closed it shut. They smeared gold lacquer across the crack to hide the sound of her voice, and they left. Chantara felt his heart squeeze as the monk spoke. They buried her alive, not to save the village, but to protect themselves from what she was becoming. The disease had eaten her flesh, but it had not eaten her will. She died in silence, but her soul did not. The monk stood slowly. The chant was never finished, he said, and now she will never stop listening, unless... He trailed off. Unless what? Unless someone finishes what they began. But it must come at a price. Someone must give their final breath willingly. Chantara stared at the bell. Its surface shimmered slightly, as if sweating. "So you're saying it's not a ghost?" The monk shook his head. "She is not a spirit. She is a remnant, a grief that learned to breathe." That night, the dreams returned. Chantara was standing in the middle of the prayer hall, but the walls were gone. The temple had become a pit, a great yawning cavity of earth and bone. And at the bottom, the girl stood. Her body was thin, wrong, arms too long, head tilted like it was barely held by flesh. Her skin hung loose, wet with clay. Her mouth was stitched shut with golden thread. She reached out, and as she touched his chest, he felt breath being pulled from his lungs, not like drowning, like being emptied. He woke gasping, choking on dirt, blood trickling from his nose. Preacher still sat in the same corner, muttering something now, a single phrase, again and again. "She has no mouth, but she speaks through us." The chanting never stopped after that. Not at night, not even in dreams. It was in the leaves, inside the stone, inside the lungs of the temple itself. And every time Chanta passed the bell, he felt his breath grow shorter, like something was practicing breathing through him. He knew what was coming. He could feel her rising, learning, becoming whole. The bell was changing, not in form, but in feeling. Every day it seemed to hum louder, not in sound, but in presence, like a vibration buried just beneath the skin. The air around it shimmered faintly in the heat. The soil at its base grew soft, darker, as if moistened by breath that never cooled. Chantara no longer walked past it without holding his breath, and even that wasn't enough anymore. He stood alone that morning, staring at the fracture he had caused days ago. The chip was small, the size of a fingernail, but it had widened, just a little, just enough. Enough to let something out. He reached forward, fingers brushing the edge of the crack. It pulsed. He pulled his hand back, heart racing. A sound escaped the bell then, not a ring, not a chime. A sigh, low, human, tired, as if something inside had just woken from a long sleep and was remembering how to breathe. Preacher had not spoken a full sentence in 2 days. He followed Chantara from room to room like a shadow, whispering fragments of the chant, sometimes backward, sometimes through teeth that didn't move. His eyes remained vacant, but his hands moved constantly, tracing symbols onto the walls, into the dirt, across his own skin. When asked questions, he would only respond with a soft phrase, "She's in the air now." That night he stood at the altar and began to hum, the same broken melody Chantara had once heard in a dream, the girl's song, the half-chant, the lullaby for the dead. He dreamed of her again, but this time she was closer. He stood in the prayer hall, but now the walls were wet. Not with rain, with sweat, with breath. The bell was gone, and she was standing where it used to be. Her mouth no longer sewn shut, her lips parted, and her voice, when it came, was a whisper wrapped in soil. You breathed into my prison. Now I will breathe through yours. He woke coughing. There was clay in his throat. At dawn he returned to the bell. Something had changed. More cracks. Hairline fractures running down the lacquered seal like veins across old skin. The gold had begun to flake, and beneath it there was movement. Not wind, not breath. Flesh. Chantara dropped to his knees, brushing the gold away with shaking hands. Beneath the lacquer, beneath the outer clay, he found a layer of skin, human, dried, preserved in the heat. He tore away another flake of gold, a fingernail, still embedded in the wall. She had not been placed in the bell. She had become it. He stumbled backward, falling into the dirt. The chanting had returned, but it wasn't coming from the jungle anymore. It was coming from inside the stone, inside the ground, inside his lungs. He pressed his hands to his ears, but the sound grew louder, more distinct. A name, not his, not hers, but Preacha's. The bell was chanting his name, again and again, as if calling him closer, calling him home. He ran to the hut. Preacher was gone. The satchel was still there, his shoes, his jacket, his tools. But the door had been left open. And inside the room, across every wall, scratched into wood and plaster and stone, was a single sentence repeated dozens of times. I gave her breath. I gave her breath. I gave her breath. Over and over, until the words twisted into symbols, until they stopped being human. Chantara searched the grounds for hours, calling, screaming, but the jungle had no voice for him anymore. He found Chantara just before dusk, kneeling at the base of the bell, naked, his chest rising and falling in rhythm with the pulse of the clay, his hands pressed to the earth, his mouth open, but not speaking, breathing for her. Chantara shouted his name, ran toward him, but as he touched Preacha's shoulder, the boy crumpled, not collapsed, crumpled, like sand. His skin fell away in flakes of clay, his bones folded in, and where his body had been, there was nothing, only dirt and a single shallow breath that escaped into the air and vanished. The bell rang once, soft, satisfied. Chantara did not sleep that night. He sat outside the bell until morning, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling. Preacha was gone, and something inside the bell had taken his breath. The crack was wider now, and from within, the sound of lungs expanding, stretching, preparing. She had only needed one soul to remember how to breathe. Now she would need another to remember how to speak. Morning came without sunlight. A gray, heavy sky draped itself over Wat Phra Noen, turning every surface dull and lifeless. The air clung to Chantara's skin like damp cloth. Even the insects were silent, as if they had fled in the night. Preacha was gone, not missing, erased. No footprints, no trail, not even bones, just absence. Absence that hummed, absence that breathed. The bell stood quietly in the courtyard, its surface glistening faintly with moisture, as though it had been sweating. The crack down its side was wider now, hairline fractures expanding into branching veins. The golden lacquer continued to peel away, flaking like dead skin. Beneath it, the inner clay trembled gently, like muscle rediscovering movement. Chantara knew what it meant. She was close. Closer than ever. He went back to the manuscript, not because he wanted to, because something in the air commanded him to. The parchment felt heavier now, as if soaked in blood. The pages rustled without wind. The ink seemed darker, wetter, like it had been freshly written. He read again. Step 1. Select the vessel. Step 2. Prepare the chamber. Step 3. Bind the vessel. Step 4. Seal the vessel beneath the bell of silence. Step 5. Bury the final breath. He had read those steps a dozen times, but now something had changed. There was more. A section he didn't remember, as if the scroll had grown overnight, or as if it had been waiting to be seen. The final page was brittle, stained dark with something that looked too rich to be ink. The handwriting was frantic, slanted, written in a rush or in terror. The ritual is not finished. We sealed her too soon. She was still alive. Her breath remained unbound. She is not spirit. She is suffering, and suffering never dies. Beneath those words, written with shaking strokes, if the vessel still breathes when sealed, the earth will not claim her. She will wait. She will listen. She will learn the breaths of others, and when she understands them, she will rise. Chantara felt the air shift behind him, as though something was standing just over his shoulder, reading with him. He continued. There was a final paragraph, one that had been torn in half, the edges jagged, the ink smeared by soil. To end her awakening, one must return to the chamber and speak the chant in full reverse. But the chant demands balance. It requires... The sentence ended abruptly. The bottom of the page was gone, ripped clean away. Chantara's pulse quickened. There was more. Somewhere, the missing section still existed, and without it, the ritual would never end. He searched frantically through the manuscript, desperate for clues. Symbols filled the margins, old Lanna characters, some familiar, many not. But one marking caught his eye, a drawing of the temple, but not as it stood now, as it had once been, before collapse, before ruin. The altar had been different then, bigger, deeper, with steps leading below the surface, a chamber beneath the chamber, a place hidden beneath the stone, a place he had never seen. He rushed to the altar. The stones were thick with moss, but now that he knew what to look for, the outline was clear. A faint, rectangular seam beneath the carvings, a secret door disguised as sacred architecture. He dug his fingers into the crack, pulled. The stone groaned, long, low, reluctant, and shifted forward. Cold air spilled out, smelling of wet clay and incense long extinguished. Steps descended into darkness. Each step was slick with condensation. The walls were narrow, carved from packed earth and stone. Symbols lined the path downward, circles, spirals, open mouths, eyes without pupils. He descended slowly, lantern in hand, heart pounding like a drum in ritual cadence. At the bottom lay a small chamber, no larger than a prayer cell. No windows, no doors, only walls that breathed. And in the center, resting on a pedestal of rotting wood, the missing pages. He knelt and lifted them gently. The parchment was damp, clinging to his skin as though it were alive. The ink had bled, but the words remained legible. To complete the rite, one must reverse the final breath. One must speak the vessel's silence back into the earth. One must give their breath willingly. One must take her place. Chantara's hands went cold. The final line was written in a different ink, darker, thicker, almost crimson. Only a living soul can finish what the dying could not. He understood now. The ritual could be completed. She could be sealed again, but only if someone chose to suffer as she did. Someone had to enter the chamber, lie beneath the bell, breathe until breath no longer came, and seal themselves in. He exhaled slowly, deeply. For the first time in days, the air around him did not feel like air. It felt like soil. It felt like her. He stood, clutching the file pages, and climbed back toward the surface. Each step felt heavier, like the earth was trying to hold his ankles in place. When he emerged into the courtyard, the world felt different. The sky was darker, though it was still morning. The soil was wet, though it had not rained. And the bell was smiling. Not in shape, in sound. A soft, rhythmic pulse beat from within it, like laughter trapped in lungs made of earth. And from behind the bell, half hidden in shadow, he saw her. The girl, barefoot, dress tattered, head tilted, watching him. Her hands no longer rotting, they looked almost human now, almost whole, and she was breathing. In, out, in, out. But when she opened her mouth, no breath came out, only a sound, a single word spoken without lips, spoken through the soil. Finish it. Chantara had not heard his daughter's voice in years. Not since the argument. Not since she walked out of his house and out of his life, leaving behind only silence and unanswered calls. But now, as the bell breathed and cracked, and the sky hung thick over Wat Phra Noen, he heard her. Not a memory, not a dream, her voice, calling him. It began softly in the early hours of morning, a whisper on the edge of thought. Papa. He had been pouring water into the offering bowl outside the prayer hall when the syllable struck the center of his chest like a thrown stone. It was not possible. She didn't know where he was. He had never told her about the temple, about the job, about the bell. But the voice came again. Papa, I'm cold. He turned. No one there. Only the trees. Only the bell, exhaling softly like a beast in sleep. Later, as he washed his hands near the cracked stone basin, he caught a glimpse of her, in the reflection, standing in the doorway of the old monk's quarters, hair down, eyes red, exactly as she had looked the last time he saw her. only thinner, quieter. He rushed to the door. The room was empty, but her voice lingered. "You left me too, just like they left her." By midday, she was everywhere. In the puddles left by the dripping roof tiles, in the soot-streaked mirror above the altar, in the shadows that moved slower than the light. "Papa, why didn't you bury me right?" He shook his head, whispered, "No, no, you're not her." But the voice replied, "Not yet." He realized then, she wasn't mimicking his daughter. She was learning her, imitating the shape of her pain, wearing her sorrow like a borrowed face. The girl in the bell, the leper. She had listened long enough to understand grief, and now she was feeding on it, fitting herself into the cracks, not in the clay, in him. That night he returned to the manuscript and found more writing in the margins. Not the original author's hand, his own, though he had no memory of writing it. Just 3 words. She hears everything. Sleep came, but brought no rest. He dreamed of his daughter standing at the base of the bell, tears streaking her face, barefoot, shivering. Behind her, the girl waited, watching, smiling. Skin tight now, flesh restored, as if every borrowed memory made her stronger. The girl whispered in his daughter's ear, and then his daughter turned to him and said, "She breathes through my name now." He woke, gasping. His daughter's name on his tongue, not spoken in years. Now it felt foreign in his mouth, stolen. He staggered to the bell. It pulsed under his hands, warm as blood. He pressed his ear to the crack, and he heard them. Not one voice, 2. His daughter and the girl, breathing in unison. The next day it rained for the first time in weeks, a slow, steady drizzle. But the ground did not drink it. The soil around the bell remained dry, unchanged. And inside the hut, Chantara found the photo he kept of his daughter tucked in his journal. Only now her face was blurred, smudged, like something had erased it or replaced it. He touched the edge of the frame, and the wood was warm, alive. He tried to pray, but the words would not come. The chants in the manuscript twisted on his tongue. The sacred syllables had been infected, tainted by imitation. He burned incense. It wilted. He lit candles. They hissed and died. The bell needed more than ritual now. It needed a voice, a willing one, a name to speak through. At dusk, he stood before the girl. She had stepped from behind the bell fully now, no longer hiding, no longer rotting. Her face was soft, smooth, almost human, almost his daughter. But her smile was wrong. It was too wide, too knowing. And her hands, they were whole again. She reached for him not in malice, but in longing, like a child reaching for a father who had never come. "Papa," she said, "I found your breath. Now give me your voice." The temple was sinking. Not all at once, but slowly, like breath being held too long, like lungs filling with water, like memory decaying into myth. Chantara walked the grounds with bare feet. The earth felt different now, softer, as though it no longer wanted to hold his weight. Footsteps sank half an inch into soil that had once been dry. The stones around the stupa tilted inward, and cracks had begun crawling up the temple walls, slow and deliberate, like veins on an aging hand. He knew it wasn't the rain. It wasn't weather. The bell was pulling everything down, into her, into the chamber that still breathed. Inside the prayer hall, statues wept streaks of mildew. Offerings of fruit and incense turned black before noon. The scent of rot was subtle, not sour or foul, just earthy, like wet clay left too long in shadow. He found himself listening more often, not for sound, for silence, because the silence around Wat Phra Noen was no longer peaceful. It was thick, it carried shape, it pressed back when he exhaled, and sometimes it answered. That evening he lit no candles. There was no point. The bell's glow had returned, faint but constant, like a heart pulsing through mud. He sat before it in the courtyard, the manuscript beside him. He did not speak, but he listened. And she came. She did not walk anymore. She rose, from the earth, from the dark beneath the roots. She no longer looked like the child from the story, not even like his daughter. She was something between, a body made from borrowed grief. Her skin still bore the cracks of clay, but now the light behind her eyes was intelligent, not ancient, awakened. She knelt beside him and whispered, "It's easier once you stop breathing." The next day he dug, not by choice, by instinct. His hands moved as if guided by a rhythm only his bones could hear. He returned to the base of the bell, to the soft soil that had swallowed Precha, and he dug, deeper than before. His nails split, his fingers bled. He did not stop. After 2 hours, he struck something hard. He cleared the earth gently, breath shallow. It was not stone. It was bone. He uncovered a full arm first, still intact, fused with mud, skin hardened into earthen lace. Fingers curled tightly around a length of golden thread. Then the shoulder, then the skull. Not buried, not decayed, merged with the bell. It had never been a separate coffin. She had grown into it. She had become the structure, the breath, the body, the echo. The bell was her shell, a chrysalis made from pain. And still she whispered, in the wind, in the corners, in her dreams. At night she showed him visions of the other bells, in other lands, other offerings, other girls, other failures. They had tried this before, across mountains, across centuries, and every time the ritual had been interrupted, the chant forgotten, the sacrifice unfinished, the breath unclaimed. Every time she remembered a little more. One evening he found something buried beneath the altar, a braid of hair, wrapped in red cloth, sealed in wax. When he unraveled it, a small tooth fell out, still white, still sharp, a child's. He stared at it for a long time. It pulsed faintly in his hand. He did not know whose it was, but he knew what it meant. She had not been alone. The ritual required two, one to breathe, one to watch. He returned to the bell just before dusk. He carried nothing with him, no manuscript, no tools, only breath. The girl waited, half shadow, half flesh, sitting in the soft earth. She no longer spoke. She no longer needed to. He knelt beside her, and the soil beneath them began to hum. The bell exhaled. The breath that escaped smelled of memories, of things left unsaid, of love curdled into guilt. And in the space between heartbeats, she whispered into his mind, "You remember the chant now, don't you?" The bell was not a relic. It was a memory, and it remembered everything. Chantara stood beneath the overcast sky, staring at the fractured surface of the clay. He hadn't slept in 3 nights. The chanting had stopped, but that only made it worse. Now there was only the breath. In, out, measured, slow, deep. It vibrated through the earth, through the roots beneath the stone, through the veins beneath his skin. Every time he blinked, he saw her, the girl not quite a girl, the ghost not quite dead, watching him with borrowed eyes, stitched from memory and silence. And now she had stopped watching. She had begun to remember. It started that morning. The bell rang again, but not from the wind, not from any hand. The sound came from within, a low, sustained hum, like a throat clearing after centuries of dirt. It resonated through the bones of the temple, through the soles of Chantara's feet, through the fog of time. And then it began to speak. Not words, not yet, but images. He saw it, clear as day, the offering, the girl in white, her face covered in golden powder to hide the lesions, her wrists tied loosely with red thread. She was not afraid, but she was aware. She understood that she was being buried alive, not for salvation, not for balance, but for silence. He watched the monks carry her toward the chamber, watched the villagers avert their eyes, watched the mother collapse to the ground, wailing behind her hands. He heard the chants, smooth, fluid, melodic, until they weren't, until the storm rose and the elder monk screamed for the bell to be sealed before the ritual could finish. He saw clay poured onto a child still breathing. He heard her fists pound the inside of the dome, and he felt the air inside the bell turn wet, not with rain, but with her voice, muffled, crushed, choked. The vision broke. Chantara gasped for air, collapsing to his knees. But the memories didn't stop. The bell was feeding him. It wanted him to know, wanted him to understand. Another vision, this time his own past, his daughter, the last argument, the slammed door, the silence afterward, the apology he never gave, the years he let pass like drifting ash. He had buried her too, not in earth, but in distance. And now the bell wore her grief like a veil. It breathed with her breath, spoke with her voice. It knew her sorrow, because it had learned it through him. He stumbled away, hands clawing at the manuscript. There had to be another way, some verse, some symbol, some lost line to reverse this. But the text had changed again. The ink had faded in places, smudged elsewhere. New lines appeared in the margins, not written by human hand, etched into the parchment by heat. Words that pulsed with memory. What is remembered lives. What is buried without peace breathes in fragments. What is sealed in silence returns in pieces. He touched the edge of the scroll. It was warm, wet, breathing. The bell rang again, this time a higher pitch, almost musical, a child's song. Chantara turned toward it. In the center of the courtyard, she stood, the girl, whole, perfect, wearing his daughter's dress, wearing his daughter's face. And yet he knew it wasn't her, because the smile was too wide, the breath too slow, and in her eyes the memory of being buried was still alive. She walked toward him, barefoot across the wet stones, mouth closed, but still speaking. He heard the words inside his head. "I remember now. You were always meant to finish it. You are the breath they left behind. You are the silence that broke the seal. You are the final offering." He stepped backward. No, she didn't stop. She tilted her head, not in question, in recognition. "The bell remembers what you forgot. The chant, the guilt, the grave. And now, so do you." Chantara screamed, not out loud, within, but it echoed through the courtyard just the same. The girl dissolved into clay, collapsed into wind, and the bell shuddered. For the first time in centuries, the sound of crying emerged from its core. Not hers, his. His tears, his voice, his memories. What the bell remembered was him. The ground no longer felt like earth. It pulsed, it breathed, it remembered, and now it waited. Chantara stood at the edge of the courtyard, body shaking, eyes fixed on the bell that had become her. Not a shell, not a prison, but a vessel of memory, formed from clay and suffering, from silence and song. It was no longer just hers. It was his too. His grief, his guilt, his unfinished breath. He held the final pages of the manuscript in one hand, but he no longer needed them. The words were inside him now, heavy, waiting. He stepped forward. Each footfall echoed through the temple like a drumbeat to the underworld. As he approached the bell, the air thickened, not with fear, with expectation, as if everything around him had stopped breathing just to make space for what came next. She stood beside it, the girl, not young anymore, not old either, just becoming. Her body no longer cracked or bloodied, no longer stitched from fragments. She was whole now, formed from every breath stolen, every memory borrowed. And she was smiling, with his daughter's mouth. Her hands reached out, not to stop him, to guide him. Chantara placed the pages gently at the base of the bell. He didn't need to read them. He knew the chant, not as a prayer, as a confession. He knelt in the soil, fingers pressed to the earth. He could feel it tremble, not with rage, with release. And he began, softly. The first lines of the ancient chant, the words the monks never finished. He spoke them in reverse, each syllable digging backward through centuries, unspooling the silence that had sealed her alive. The bell moaned, not loud, not angry, just tired, as though waking from a dream it had been forced to keep. As the chant continued, the girl stepped inside the bell. No door, no opening. She simply passed through the crack like mist, like memory returning to its source. Inside, she knelt, her face tilted up, her mouth opened, and she waited. Chantara stood now, voice breaking, legs weak. He felt his own breath begin to shorten. With every word, a piece of it left him. Not air, life, soul. He took the final step forward. The manuscript's final line echoed in his ears. Only a living soul can finish what the dying could not. He stepped inside the bell, and the air changed. It wasn't cold, it wasn't warm. It was still, like a held breath, like a heartbeat about to stop. She faced him, not accusing, not begging, just present. And then, for the first time, she spoke with her own voice. No mimicry, no borrowed name, just one word: breathe. He inhaled, long, deep, filling his lungs with the weight of centuries. Then he spoke the last line of the chant, the one never written, the one only the bell remembered. And as it passed his lips, he gave it to her, his final breath. Silence followed, real silence, the kind that doesn't wait to be broken, the kind that means something has ended, or perhaps finally begun. Outside, the sky cleared, the earth stilled, and for the first time in over 300 years, the bell no longer breathed because it no longer needed to. It had been fed, it had been finished, and now it was asleep, full, silent, whole. The moment the final breath left Chantara's body, the bell stopped breathing. The pulse that had haunted Wat Phra Noen for centuries, the slow, rhythmic exhale of a spirit too long silenced, faded into stillness. For the first time, the earth was quiet. And then, it cracked. The sound was not loud, it was delicate, like the splitting of old bark, like a whisper escaping a sealed tune. The golden lacquer peeled away entirely, curling like dead leaves in the windless courtyard. The clay around the fracture line shivered. A thin line of red dust spilled from the seam. Not blood, not soil. Something older, something left behind. And in that silence, the bell let go. It cracked open, from base to crown, a long, deliberate parting, not violent, not forced, willing. Inside there was no body, no bones, no scream. Only a robe, folded neatly, laid upon the earth like an offering. And atop it, a single thing, a breath, suspended, visible, like mist caught in amber. It hovered for a moment, then drifted up into the open sky and vanished with the dawn. The girl was gone. No shadow, no footprint, no echo. What had risen through grief and memory, through clay and rot, had now returned, not to rest, but to release. And the temple felt different, not safe, not holy, but still, as though something vast and ancient had finished watching. Villagers claimed they saw light that night, a warm glow above the tree line. Some said it was fire, others said it was sunrise come too early. But no smoke followed, no ash, only a sudden silence over the hills, a deep, clean hush, the kind that happens after something sacred has been spoken and heard, the kind that does not need to be explained. They found the temple a week later, a traveling monk. He came not looking for anyone. He had heard the bell in a dream, a single note, calling. When he arrived, the bell was broken, the manuscript gone, the altar cleared. But something lingered in the air, a peace not born of joy, but of ending. He stepped into the courtyard, knelt, and placed his hands upon the earth. It was warm, and for a moment he thought he heard breathing, but not hers, not the girl, not even the bell. His own. In the ruins of the sculptor's hut, the monk found a journal, weathered, scorched at the edges. Its pages told the story of the bell, of the offering, of the man who came to restore what should have been left untouched. And on the last page, written in a calm, steady hand, "I was never meant to fix this, only to finish it." Some bells are not made to ring, they are made to remember. Back in the village, a child was born weeks later, a girl, healthy, bright-eyed, but strange. She didn't cry when she came into the world. She only breathed, long and slow, as though remembering something, as though waking from clay. Her mother said she sometimes hummed in her sleep, a broken melody, unfinished. And her first word, when it came, wasn't "mama." It was a whisper, a word no one taught her, a word no one could quite translate, a word that sounded like a name. Chantara. The rain returned 3 days after the bell cracked open. Not the hard, punishing storms of monsoon season, but gentle rain, soft, forgiving, as though the sky itself was exhaling. In the village below Wat Phra Noen, people emerged from their homes to feel it on their skin. Some stood barefoot in the fields. Others left bowls outside to catch the water, as if it carried something sacred. They didn't speak of the temple. They never had. But when they looked to the hilltop, they no longer turned away. The fear that had clung to the mountain for generations had loosened its grip. Whatever had haunted the silence was no longer listening, or perhaps it had finally been heard. At the temple, wildflowers began to grow, sprouting through the cracks in stone, blooming along the path that once led to the sculptor's hut. No one planted them, no one watered them, but they grew, because something had changed in the soil, something that was not death, something that had once been pain, was now breath. The bell, broken and hollowed, lay open in the courtyard, its edges soft, its shape no longer perfect, but no longer needed. Children who passed nearby would sometimes pause and stare into its hollow, and listen, not for sound, but for the absence of it. They said the wind there was warmer, that if you closed your eyes you could feel it brush your cheek, like someone breathing out for the last time. In a nearby town, a girl turned 12. She had never been to Wat Phra Noen, but sometimes when she slept, she dreamed of clay, of bells that hummed, of a man with dirt on his hands and kindness in his eyes. She hummed when she worked in the fields, an old tune, fragmented, like a chant only half remembered. She never knew where she learned it, but it always made her feel calm. One night, under a moonless sky, she stood at the river's edge. The air was still, the water quiet, and she whispered, "You can rest now." No one had taught her the words, but she knew them, the way roots know the earth, the way breath knows the body. Back at the temple, the altar had collapsed. No one rebuilt it. They let it return to the soil. Moss covered the stones. lichen crept up the broken statues. But the space where the bell had stood remained untouched. No vines grew there, no birds nested. It was not empty, only full of something unseen. The space was sacred now, not because of gods, but because of remembrance. They say temples remember the names spoken within them, but some remember the names that were never spoken, the names buried in silence, the names that tried to scream but were turned into breath. And she breathes now, not from a bell, not from a curse, but from the earth, from the wind, from the mouths of those who carry grief gently. She breathes in stories, in lullabies, in unfinished chants passed from one generation to the next, not to haunt, not to harm, but to remind that some offerings are not made in blood, some are made in listening, in finishing what others were too afraid to complete, in giving breath where there was once only silence. Wat Phra Noen still stands, but not as a warning, as a whisper, one that drifts through the jungle just after the rain. And if you listen closely, really listen, you'll hear it. Not a voice, not a scream, just breath. Soft, warm, alive.